All right, Michael, we're thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
We've been seems like good buds for some time now. You've been on this show before, and before we get in, and of course we're talking about this issue, which is this entire series has been about is trans in sport, which is, as I like to describe it, boy, this is a really complicated issue. And then you have other folks that say, hey, actually, it's not very complicated at all. And I'm trying to listen to, I want to hear all sides of this debate, right? And a highly politicized, fear-based debate. But before we get into that, I just have to ask, because I'm so curious. You said you're spending some time in Austin. Of course, I spent 30 years there and moving back there. I was just there the other day. Heat index was 120.
Oh, God.
I know. It was, I was like, maybe the 7 months of snow wasn't that bad.
Right.
But you said you've been spending time down there. There's a group down there starting a new university called the University of Austin.
Right. Yes. Actually, a lot of people I know from California are moving to Austin.
Right.
It seems to be the place to go, like our mutual friend Rogan and a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
At any rate, there's this group of kind of disaffected academics who have been canceled for various anti-woke attitudes or free speech attitudes. They're very much in favor of free speech and against censorship and cancel culture and all that. And so they formed this independent university.
Right.
Not that that's unusual. I mean, people go, oh my God, how can you start a new university?
Right.
Well, all universities have to start somewhere.
Right.
You know, I went to Pepperdine University just up the hill from us here in Malibu, and I was a graduate of the first 4-year graduating class at the Malibu campus. I mean, somebody has to be first. So, and that was a Christian college at the time. I was Christian.
Right.
But so, you know, people start universities for various reasons. And this one appears to be no forbidden topics. No fear of cancel culture, no censorship. We're just going to talk about anything anybody wants to talk about, which you would think that would be the motto of every university everywhere. And it used to be until the last decade or 20 years maybe or so. And the problem is that most academics are liberal. So universities have been largely captured by the Democratic Party. We know from voting records and donation records and support of candidates records that are public, you know, something like the order of 90% of professors in the social sciences are Democrats or liberals, and maybe 70% in the biological sciences. The only one where it's not hugely slanted is economics. So, you know, you get this bias that the students are not getting a fair hearing on hot button topics. And so the University of Austin wants to kind of remedy that so this summer they're having these forbidden courses. So I'm doing a lecture. I'm just basically how to think like a scientist and, just look at the facts.
With an actual campus?
No, they don't have a campus yet. No. It's in a hotel in Dallas, actually, not in Austin, which is okay, whatever. I think it's temporary. But I think they're hoping to open a campus in 2024, 2025. Academic year. I think that's the goal. And they have money. They've raised apparently $200 million. I mean, that's what it takes to have physical buildings and professors on
I know
campus.
Some of the folks involved, and yeah, they have that.
That's good to know in case they want to hire me.
Well,
I'd like to get paid.
Yeah, I think that really dovetails into this conversation, at least from my perspective, because as I said a second ago, you know, highly politicized, really based in fear. People will not, which just shows you how smart I am or whatever, but people just don't want to talk about this issue of trans in sport. We've seen what's happened to Leah Thomas's competitors, right? You've seen the example with Riley Gaines and how she was given a speech somewhere and was basically attacked by the
UC San Francisco,
by the trans community. You saw some of the other, of course, Leah Thomas swam for University of Pennsylvania. Some of the women on the Princeton team went to the league, right? So I don't know what that league, the Ivy League or whatever, and expressed their concerns and were branded transphobes and bigots.
Right.
I've had my own personal experience with this, and even as nuanced as my my view is, because I don't like to think I am, and and I've told this story in other shows leading up to this. I have an employee who's transitioning, and yes, I didn't see it coming, but I don't have a problem admitting that this has been a process for me, but I can also admit that right now, let's go. Whatever's in your heart and soul, I'm totally okay with that. And then you talk about other aspects of it, specifically trans in sport. And again, I sit in a bit of a unique seat where the idea of being canceled is really not, I think most people, that's a real fear. I'm sort of less concerned about that, let's say.
You're not cancelable, Lance.
I've been there, right? And so,
but it doesn't feel good.
It does. It just. But what doesn't feel good is that we can't even enter into the not even a debate, but have a dialogue about this. And so it ties in, and I'm so curious to get your thoughts, obviously, on just the sporting side, right? Trans in sport, fairness, not fair, whatever. But also just from a societal standpoint, like what is it like? And it isn't just this issue, right? It could be abortion, it could be guns, it could be whatever. And people just clam up. They won't talk. And like, what are we doing here? And just as an example, and I was reading this New York Times piece from, you were talking about academics and how, you would think too, like if most of the academics are liberal, and you would just think those are the people that would think we can say whatever the fuck you want to say.
Yeah.
I would think. I'm not. Again,
well, it used to be that way.
I never went to college, but you have this fella, this doctor at the Mayo Clinic. Are you familiar with this? Michael Joyner. So he was quoted here in this New York Times article, and he's talked a lot about this, and specifically in this article, and he's talking about, he uses swimming as an example, and a lot of this debate comes down to prepubescent boys. And he's just matter of fact. He says, you see the divergence immediately as the testosterone surges into the boys. There are dramatic differences in performances. Well, he's now basically being fired, or he's been suspended without pay from the Mayo Clinic.
Right. Okay. I heard about this case. Yeah.
And
right.
It's sort of a melange of University of Austin and this topic. But what are we doing if you can't even? I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I'm pretty sure that's based on some fact and some research and some science. And the guy can't even talk, and he's at a gold standard clinic like the Mayo Clinic, and he can't give an interview in the New York Times.
Right. Imagine the silencing effect that has on younger doctors who see that and go, oh, well, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. You're not cancelable. J.K. Rowling's not cancelable, but anybody else who sees that happen will think, well, I got a family to feed. I got a job. Well, what else am I going to do if I get fired? I'm just going to keep my head down. And that's the way most people react. We know from some polls that most people are not on board with the trans sports, that is trans women competing against women. These are men. They say, oh, it's unfair, but almost no one wants to speak out about it. So that's a problem. And, the only way we can get to the truth is if we can communicate clearly, what are the facts? What do we know? What don't we know?
Right.
So then a couple other cuts we can make here, the difference between private and public issues. So your employee is transitioning. You're cool with that. Right. Of course. I've never met Caitlyn Jenner. You just had her on. I would not call her Bruce. I would say Caitlyn.
Right.
That's what she wants.
Right.
Okay. Why would you not do that? But, to make it a public thing, like, well, we're going to have a policy now in which the government is going to come in and enforce laws about transitioning or not transitioning, or about pronoun use or no pronoun use or whatever. So then it's politicized. Then you got DeSantis in Florida going, we're going to have these laws. And you got Newsom in California going, no, we're going to have these laws. Well, okay. At the moment in California, if you are a parent and you have a minor and you do not let them transition when they want to, and they've consulted a doctor and so on, you can have protective services intervene and maybe even take your kid away. In Florida, it's the opposite, right? If you do it, then you could be interrogated by protective services. It's like, okay, so this is where the problem is. What do we make universal across the board based on some rule. And the problem is this is so new. We just don't know a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple other cuts. So we know that gender dysphoria is a real thing. It's a vanishingly small, very, maybe 0.01% of the population. From a very early age, these are mostly young boys who feel like they're in the wrong body, whatever the right term is, because you are your body. But for whatever reason, they don't feel comfortable in the male body, so they want to transition. And then later, usually the way it's happened for the last century or so is they're transsexuals, or they actually do something in their 20s or 30s. And they're adults, they can do whatever they want. Okay, fine. That's a different thing than this new thing that's just been discovered in the last decade called rapid onset gender dysphoria, RODG.
It's the first I've heard that.
Yeah. So this is not young kids. This is teenage, mostly girls, like 13, 14, 15, middle school into high school. And we think this is not the same as the regular old gender dysphoria. This is something else, probably a social contagion. Mm-hmm. There are some schools where 10%, 20%, a third of the class are trans. Right. It's like, that's not normal. That's just not, we're a sexually reproducing species. It can't be that confusing, So that appears to be a social contagion, much like anorexia, bulimia, cutting, anxiety, depression on the part of teens. This appears to be a social contagion effect. So this is where the real controversy kicks in, because now you have this, but we as a public policy should have the gender affirming transitional medical treatments, hormone, puberty blockers, hormone transitions, surgery. There's these girls getting double mastectomies. It's astonishing. So what is the research that says you can put a pause on puberty, and then if they change their mind, you can just restart it up again, like a Netflix documentary. Right. There's no evidence that you can do that. But we don't have much evidence at all about any of this, right? It's like, what are the effects in 20 years from now from taking puberty blocker? Nobody knows. And it looks like from some of the detransitioners, these are people that transition and then change their mind. Now that they're in their 20s, they're sexually disabled, as it were. They can't function sexually normally. They can't get pregnant. They can't, be parents. They can't breastfeed because their breasts are gone. And now there's some lawsuits being filed against the medical establishment, clinics and doctors, that could turn this thing around. But that's where it's the real gray areas. And then there's a third cohort of people that is activists, trans activists. These are the people that go after you and J.K. Rowling and whoever. They themselves are not trans, but they feel like this is the next thing. We had civil rights, women's rights, gay rights. Now we're going to do the trans rights. So here, then you end up with this kind of conflicting rights issues and confusion about like same-sex marriage and gay rights. That's who you're attracted to. That's a completely different thing than who you identify as a biological person. That's a different issue, but people confuse that. They think, well, they must be the same, so I want to be on board with the next great moral revolution. I want to be part of that. And that's what the activists are doing. And they're the ones really pushing for the legislation. And of course, then it's politicized. So conservatives are the ones going, hang on, we should push back against that. And I'm not conservative. And I'm going, hey, we should not rush into this. Right. And then I get so you're one of those transphobe conservatives. Like, no, I'm not.
Right. No, you're not. And of course, the community has been bunched together, right? The LGBTQ plus community is sort of, they're on one team, right? Essentially, because for whatever reason it's just been applied that way. And it just seems to me that there's, we saw it in the interview with Caitlyn, and just in preparation for that piece with her, just in talking to the community and frankly, even talking to my employee, she's on an island, right? She's a ultra conservative, trans woman, that also thinks that trans women shouldn't compete at elite sport, and probably thinks, that we should be careful about at what age this is appropriate. So she's on an island, but then you have, and of course this, and I didn't even know this phrase, because it seems like there's some infighting here, right? And so now you've got this acronym called TERF.
Yes.
Right. And you know, and other, you know,
trans exclusionary radical feminists.
Right. So you had in this particular example, you had Martina Navratilova come out and say, no, there's no way I could have competed. You know, this is one of the greatest of all time. She says, there's no way I could have competed against a trans female. And so she is opposed to this. And you know, these activists in the trans community called her a TERF.
Yeah.
And she says, and I quote, so I'm a TERF? Okay. Is that the way you want to go? She said, I played against taller women. I played against stronger women, and I beat them all. But if I faced the male equivalent of Leah Thomas in tennis, that's biology. I would have had no shot, and I would have been livid. But so you know, there's all of this animosity, obviously, and just infighting.
Yeah.
Coupled with the community, and even as a supporter of, I mean, obviously, we all have a lot of gay friends and all the letters, in the trans community. I'm worried if I'm thinking for them, I'm worried about where this is going. I mean, the poll numbers are pretty clear that you know, in even liberal outlets like or you know, more left-leaning outlets like CNN, their poll numbers will tell you that America's tolerance or patience for this is waning, which you have to also take a step back and go, well, why? Why is it this issue? Is it you know, you know, obviously all the examples we know, the Bud Light example and Target and all of these things that, you know, it gets people's attention and it makes them think. Mm-hmm.
And really push back, because anyone with two eyes can see there is a massive difference between men and women on average. Of course, Martina could beat, you know, lots of men, but that isn't the comparison. It's, you know, you have two overlapping bell curves. Just say height. So men are on average taller than women, but some women are taller than some men, but that's not the comparison we want to make. You know, it's the top players against the other top players, and that's a huge difference. So even Serena Williams has said, I'd lose to the 200th placed man every time. You know, love 6. It's just the difference is huge. If you ever see the mixed doubles tennis by the pros and the men serving to the women when it's that particular arrangement, it's just almost comical. The women they're lucky to even get the racket on the ball at all, much less return it, because the serves is just like 50 miles an hour faster by the men. Right. That's just arm strength, ligaments, tendons, the length of your femur, the whole body. And this idea, you know, originally the NCAA and the UCI and the Olympic Committee all said, okay, so if you take 1 year as post-puberty male, 1 year off and do testosterone suppression, we will then let you compete. So that's
what they've said.
Yeah, that's what Leah Thompson. So Leah Thompson legitimately competed in the NCAA. They said you can do it. So, but is that enough? And the answer is no, it doesn't, because when you look underneath the hood of the engine, there's 1,000 changes, not just the testosterone level. There's post-puberty, you have a different heart, different cardiovascular, different VO2 uptake, lung capacity.
And the cumulative, and one would say the cumulative effect of having had that body with testosterone for many, many years. Yeah. Right. And so you know, the strength that is built there, the endurance that's built there, the cardiovascular, as you said, that's built there.
So there you get then, you know, conflicting rights. So, okay, trans rights or human rights. Okay. But not all rights are the same, and you can't have everything you want in life, right? So you have pro-choice, pro-life on the abortion issue. Who's right? Well, science can't really settle that. It's a political issue. And so trans women are women and they should be able to do what they want. Okay. They shouldn't be fired for being trans on the job. They shouldn't be discriminated against in restaurants yeah, of course. But you want to conflict with women's rights to compete against their or women's spaces, bathrooms. You can't walk into a bathroom. Right.
And that's the slippery slope. That's the one where, and, you know, certainly in this series, and it's hard not to go there. It's hard not to think about it. I have 3 daughters. Not all athletes, but it's just you have to also look at your daughters and imagine that they're athletes and that they'll be in a locker room or a changing room or, a foreign locker room before a big meet or a big event. And it's hard not to go there. That's the slippery slope on as a parent, for sure.
Well, you want to be supportive.
Of course.
So you go, we want to support trade. Well, but what happened to listen to the women? Women's rights, Title IX. For decades, we've been taught when women tell you something, listen to them.
Yeah. Well, that's what I don't know about you, but that's what I do.
Always. It's good for marriage.
Then what has happened here? It's a question. What if the poll numbers are what they are? If and I think Washington Post recently had a poll on, polled Americans on what's their view on trans in sport? Is it fair or not fair? Do you approve or not approve? It's pretty overwhelming, right? So you have that. And then you have just kind of what most would look at just like a logical assessment of fairness and is this right? We know meanwhile, but first of all, as we've discussed, nobody will have the conversation. People won't stand up for Title IX. The IOC, they issue a framework for fairness inclusion on this issue and basically says nothing. I mean,
I know it's really
is that a byproduct of just living in 2023?
I think so. Cancel culture. Everybody's afraid of being mobbed because there are consequences, even though it's a minority number of people that would try to cancel you. It's loud enough that it silences people. And this is also, people don't know, without open conversation, people think everybody else thinks a certain way. It's called the spiral of silence or pluralistic ignorance, where everybody thinks everybody else believes something, but in fact they don't. So the classic study on this is with college binge drinking. So you ask individual college students, do you like to binge drink? No, I don't like it, but all my friends like it and I just want to go along. But every one of them says, well, I don't like it, but everybody else likes it. So, it's like, all right, so that's the problem. So this conversation, and the more we can have, the better. People can go, oh, so most people don't buy into this. And again, it's just we're talking about public policies here. Men that want to identify as women and go transferred into women's prisons. Okay, this is a problem. And the counterfactual tells us all we need to know. How many female to male transitioners want to compete against men in men's sports? I've not heard a single case. How many female to male transitioners want to transition from the women's prison to the men's prison? Right. None. Why? We don't, everybody knows why. Right. So, and there you just can't have everything. It's like, look, if you want to transition, that's your business. I'll support you personally, but you can't conflict against these other people. You can't take their rights away.
And of course you have these examples like you just brought up, of male prisoners who are probably in some rough prison I can't imagine, I've never been there, but I can't imagine is any place you want to hang out. And sure, you say, you know what, I've decided I'm going to transition, and you go to probably a much gentler place. There's the example of the prisoner who transitioned and identifies as a female, went and then impregnated a couple ladies, right? These are things that people sort of, get into or get behind. And then, had the story of the registered sex offender here in Los Angeles, where we're sitting, that went to the day spa and
the Wee Spa. Yeah.
Walked in and said to the attendant, I identify as a female. And the lady, the attendant says, well, there's your changing room. Meanwhile, a bunch of moms and young girls in there, we all know how that can end up. So I think those are outliers, but nonetheless troubling.
Okay. So it's not we don't have a moral panic and see this is happening every day.
Right.
No, okay. Yeah, but it shouldn't happen at all. The fact that homicides are rare doesn't mean, well, homicide's okay. We should still have laws against this. I belong to a gym in Santa Barbara. If I walked into the ladies' room, that's it. My membership is out. I'd be escorted out and never allowed back on the premises, as it should be. And, so these aren't hard issues. I think most people go, yeah, of course. Right. But
what did you call it? The spiral of silence?
Yeah. Spiral of silence. Right. Pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence. Oh, it was also called the Abilene syndrome, where based on a family that all drove to Abilene from wherever they were. And they all got there and realized no one actually wanted to go to Abilene. And they're like, oh, no, I thought you wanted to go. No, I thought you said it's Abilene Paradox, I think it's called. Yeah.
Is that a real thing?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Abilene?
No.
No. I mean, I'm sure there's some wonderful, Dave, you're from that part of Texas. Dave, who's on all these shows, is from up there. Yeah. I if I were in that car, I'd probably get there and be like, whose idea was this again? Yeah. I didn't know that it was actually an actual thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, politically, like totalitarian regimes can kind of hover in the ether where almost nobody supports the regime itself, but everybody thinks everybody else supports it. And the moment you shut down the press, then there's no coverage of the fact that most people don't support this regime and so on. You get this spiral of silence. And then once you start locking people up for speaking out against the regime, then everybody can see, I'm going to just keep my mouth shut because my neighbor just got arrested and hauled off. So this is what happens in North Korea, Nazi Germany, Soviet, Russia, and so on. So that's a large scale political issue. But the smaller one, on a university campus in a corporation like Disney, say, what if you're conservative in Disney? Are you you'd probably just keep your mouth shut. I have a good job, well paid. It's a fun company to work for. They've all gone woke, but I'm just going to keep my head down.
Mm. And I had also on this series, I had Roger Pielke on, and probably the most significant thing he said, because to me as an athlete and as I've often admitted, I mean, swimming was my first love. So anything swimming related, which of course Leah Thomas's story falls into, and I just pay attention. I love the sport. I love looking at times. I love the training. I think it's one of the purest sports out there. And I said to Roger, I said, listen, I could forget all this stuff. Like, is it fair, right? Look at that. Right, Leah Thomas is 6'4", 6'5", has size 15, whatever. All the advantages that we know come with swimming, and you want people to you're asking smart people like, just answer the question: is that fair? Mm-hmm. And he had an amazing answer. He said, "Playing by the rules. Those are the rules."
Yeah.
So in that regard, and as far a guy like him, that's all he thinks about. It's like, playing by the rules. So yes, for now it is fair.
Yeah, but the rules are wrong. The governing body needs to. Well, they need to follow the science. Everybody said follow the science. Well, the science says.
But he'll also say that, but there's no science.
Yeah. Well,
there's very little science on this.
Yeah, that's right.
And
although there are studies now that I think our mutual friend Inga Thompson cited 22 peer-reviewed studies showing that post-puberty, 1 year of testosterone suppressant does not level the playing field. Mm-hmm. Let's say. Just take the Leah Thompson. So I opened one of my essays with this. Now count to 38, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and then we continue on here. That's the difference between Leah Thompson and the second place finisher in the 2021 Zippy NCAA tournament or swim meet in the 1,650 meter.
The 500 free.
I think it was 1,500 free.
The 16, yeah.
And then the 500 free, I think, was a 5 second. Mm-hmm. But even that, 5 seconds, in the pool, you can see that's like 5 body lengths. Mm-hmm. That's huge, right? And that's just not fair. I mean, anybody can see that's not fair. Or
the example, the one that's gotten, I think even more attention, and I think partly due to the fact that she's been. I think she's been pretty courageous to stand up, is Riley Gaines, right? The example of, and the fact that there's even an absolute tie in anything is, right. That's, you talk about rare. I mean, this never happens, down to the 1,000th of a second, which, apparently it was, and to have a governing body like the NCAA that decides that no, Leah's going to have the top step and Leah's going to do the interviews and it just seems like for all the confusion and just this issue, it seems like there's a better outcome.
Well, you could have an open category.
Well, and look,
anybody can compete in this category.
So the debates, well, there's two things on that. So, anytime that, and I've learned a lot through this process, I will say, and I'm not, and I will admit my view has slightly changed, not completely changed, but previous to sort of learning as much as I can about this, that was my answer. Hey, you know what? I kind of said 4 things. I said, number 1, don't ask me a question about something you think is going to get me canceled, because I don't give a shit. Right. But I also say it's ridiculous that nobody will have this conversation for fear of getting canceled. I think that's ridiculous. So let's establish that. Number 2, as is the case with the person who works for us, full support. Number 3, I have a real problem when it comes to the sports issue. And finally, number 4, look, we have the Olympics, we have the Paralympics, we have the Special Olympics. If this is really something that's part of our future, we'll just set up a different category, a different games, and everybody's they're not slighted, they're not minimized. It's the same, right? And you're honored, and the medal shines the same, and weighs the same, and looks the same, and they hate that, right? They hate that, and the.
But why? That seems like such a logical
solution. I'll tell you
solution.
right now. Here's what. I'll tell you what the American Civil Liberties Union says about. Hold on, but this is what the ACLU will tell you, and this is regarding the Leah Thomas situation. ACLU says, and I quote, "It's not a women's sport if it doesn't include all women athletes. Leah Thomas belongs on the swimming and diving team."
Yeah, okay.
So the part B to this, before you answer, is there are events like we just had Unbound Gravel, which is a big gravel race. It's kind of become kind of the Paris-Roubaix of North American gravel racing. And I saw the start list, and I saw the men's start list, and I saw the women's start list, and then they had a separate category for non-binary. You're not obliged to sign up for that. You can sign up if you roll up Michael Shermer and say, you know, today I've decided I identify as a woman. They allow you to sign up for that. So you're not obligated to go into a separate category currently.
Yeah, well, that's a problem, I think. I mean, if I was a woman and it was a guy standing next to me, like, come on, this is just not fair. I mean, it's just not. I mean, do we really need science? Well, it's good to have the science. But again, post-puberty, there's just a massive difference in most sports. Maybe there's some sports. Somebody sent me something about disc golf, Frisbee golf, which is, I had no idea is a big thing now, right? I mean, they got money and prize money, and they have a women's category and then an open, which is men and anybody that wants to whatever. And they've not had any protests about that so far. And the ACLU, that statement, that's just, so here's the problem. What do you mean by woman? Okay. So, Matt Walsh's film, what is a woman? Yeah. What is a woman? Well, we know what that is, an adult human female. It's not just having the chromosomes. It's, what the chromosomes and the genetics do to the body through puberty and after. I mean, just, you got to open up the hood and look underneath there. It's not just one or two things. Oh, you've got breasts, or you have a vagina, or you have a penis. That's it. No, there's 1,000 little changes that go with the whole reproductive biology system that's different than between men and women. It's just massively different. And, to think that you can become one or the other, you can't. It's just, you can't. And although I'm sympathetic to trans as well, I just feel like I'm in the wrong body. Okay. That's a kind of an old dualistic, like the ghost in the machine. There's this soul floating around up there, and I have the female soul instead of the male soul, or ghost, or whatever. It's just, that's not science. That's non-existent. That's just, there's something with the chemicals, hormones in utero, pre-puberty, whatever, something happened. And these young kids just don't feel comfortable with who they've been assigned at birth, but it's not even that. It's not like even that phrase, assigned at birth. It's like the doctor is just going to flip a coin. Well, maybe it's a boy. Right. Maybe it's not the case. So the activists are changing the language. The words matter. A woman means something, man means something, and to say a woman could be anything that anybody wants it to be, then what are we talking about? What's the word even mean? I don't even know what to say. If you say, well, women, that men can menstruate and get pregnant. No, they can't. Yes, they can, because trans women are women. Okay. What do you mean by woman then? Right. Because what does that even mean? Right. So that's the problem. That is our language is shifted, and everybody's so afraid to say, no, I'm not going to use that word for, male to female trans. They're not actually becoming women. They can't. It's impossible. You can't do it. You can do the surgeries and the hormones, and that for these young children who are truly gender dysphoric, there is some evidence that makes them feel better. Mm-hmm. They're less anxious or uncomfortable in their bodies. Okay, fine. But no one's hurt by that, right? They're just helped. These other issues, these teen girls. I had a student at Chapman University a couple of years ago who announced mid-semester she was trans. She wanted to be a boy, a man, whatever. And she cut her hair, started dressing in men's clothes and so on. She didn't do any.
Changed her name. She didn't do any of the hormones. She was going to wait till the summer for that. I thought, well, that's good. Let's get you through this semester. But then it became apparent. This is a seminar, so. It's like 20 students. So everybody's like, oh my God, and they just kind of love bombed her. Like, oh, this is so courageous. This is so interesting. Lots of questions. And she was very loquacious about all this. She just starts telling us her whole life story. Oh, I've been seeing a psychiatrist since I was in middle school. I have autism. I'm on the spectrum. I have depression, anxiety. I'm taking antidepressants. I'm doing this. I'm on like 6 different psychiatric drugs. And I'm hoping that the transitioning will solve these problems. Well, we have some evidence now that it doesn't do that. These detransitioners that said, yeah, when I was a teenager, I went through this horrible, I hated my body and so on. And then I thought the trans would fix it and it didn't. So that's, again, the difference between the teenagers and the young children, the gender dysphoria versus rapid onset gender dysphoria. Well, the detransitioning is if let's just call it a phenomena. If this is a phenomena that's relatively new, right? Then it's going to be years and years and years before you start to hear the stories of detransitioners, which you're starting to hear some of that.
There's maybe 100 now we have. So it's not a huge database to know for sure, but at the very least, how about in medicine, there's this thing called watchful waiting. Like maybe you have an enlarged prostate and you go, what should I do? And your doctor may go, well, let's just wait and see before we do any surgery, and so this is what a lot of my gay friends are thinking, that, if a 13-year-old boy says I'm attracted to other boys, let's just wait and see. Maybe he's just gay and that's okay now. Right. Rather than, we better rush him through transition so he doesn't get harmed. No, how about just watchful waiting? Let's just see what happens.
It's here in this the article in the Wall Street Journal written by Gerald Posner.
Yeah, Gerald Posner. Yeah, I know Gerald. Yeah.
The truth about puberty blockers. The FDA hasn't approved them for gender dysphoria, and their effects are serious and permanent. There's all kinds of complications with Lupron, but he talks in here about watchful waiting.
Yes. Yeah. Lupron, you know what that's used for? Yeah. Chemical castration of pedophiles.
Amongst other things. I mean, it's used, it is a cancer drug, I think, for some prostate cancer maybe. And I mean, serious stuff.
I'll tell you another story, because, I was one of the founders of Race Across America. So I did that 5 times. And then I was the race director for a decade in the 90s. And in 1993, I had 2 women, Shauna Hogan and Muffy Ritz, who were really strong riders. And they led the entire field into Colorado, started in Santa Monica. And we were talking, in the band, wow, maybe RAM will be, ultra marathon cycling will be the first sport that doesn't have gender categories, no sex categories, because women for, let's say, 10 days can stay up with men because it's not just raw strength short term, it's more long-term endurance or whatever. Anyway, so, and Shauna also broke the transcontinental record. Then she did it again in 94 and did it again in 95. She's phenomenal and still finished 25 to 30 hours behind the men by the end.
But last year, was it last year or the year before?
But there weren't any top men. The men's field was pretty small and weak. Okay. Yeah. So again, you had to just kind of this on average. I mean, in 93, it was an Australian road racer, Jerry Tatry, is one of the top guys in Australia. And he, beat Shauna by 36 hours. And in the off season, I said to Shauna and Muffy, should I have just no sex division at all? Just single prize for the win? No, No, because it's not fair. It's clearly not fair. There's a huge strength difference on average.
And the two good examples, of course, you have, and I asked Caitlyn Jenner this, because according to Caitlyn, was having, gender dysphoria, not long after. I mean, she won the gold medal, which, by the way, she brought out, which was really cool.
She did?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And so it was that we did the interview at her house. And I just thought, well, where's this gold medal? Brings it out. It was awesome. This is in 1976. The gender dysphoria sort of started, if you believe the story, in the early 1980s. And I just said, look, what if you would have gone ahead and just said and made the transition? What would have? And of course, the women don't do the decathlon; they do the heptathlon. Said, listen, that would have destroyed them. Renee Richards is now, of course, did compete, didn't have a problem with it at the time, but now in hindsight says something to the effect of, I've reconsidered, my decision, not my decision, but whether it was fair or not, right?
Renee Richards said that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but it's not. And again, it's helpful instead of thinking black and white. If we think of just kind of two fuzzy sets.
This is a very black and white issue for a lot of people.
I know. And it's politicized. A lot of people pushing back, like Abigail Schreier, she's a conservative, right? And Matt Walsh, very conservative, very Catholic, and so on. It's like, where are the liberals who were used to champion women's rights and Title IX rights? And, come on. So our mutual friend Inga Thompson, she's liberal, lifelong Democrat. She's speaking out. And there's more of that happening now, but only because I think conversations like this, it's like, yes, I'm going to speak out and hopefully I won't get canceled.
But in the story, and just as for those listening, so Inga Thompson was you had on your show recently, and I've known I went to Colorado Springs to the Olympic Training Center in, let's just call it 1988. So she was a little older than me, but she was there, 3 Olympic medals, a legend. I didn't even know she was really that involved with cycling anymore. And so she took a position after Austin Killips won, I think, Tour of Gila, which has now gone on to win other events. And I want to also, you can kind of break down Austin Killips' performance in the time trial, just the time trial alone, which of course is the easiest to analyze from Tour of the Gila, and what that actually would have meant, because rode the time trial on a standard road bike. So if you could just you back out of the performance and with a truly fast bike, a better position, what that would actually be. Anyways, wins Tour of Gila overall. Inga comes out and says that frankly, I didn't know that she was liberal. One would assume, just the way that the story was portrayed in the aftermath, that she wasn't liberal.
Right.
So the reminder for the folks listening, said, listen, this isn't fair. I think all the other women should just take a knee and say, refuse to race. And of course, living in the times that we live in, where cancel culture is real and being canceled is real, or fired or shamed. She was fired from the team that she worked for. And you had her on your show, so I'm curious, and I haven't followed too closely other than knowing she was let go. But right, where are the women if that's...
Yeah.
I mean, this is not... America is sort of topic du jour or hot subject du jour.
Right. Next week it'll be something different. This one seems to be lasting longer. There are now some pushback legally in the UK. The health system said no more transitioning minors. That's now against the law because of lawsuits, and that could happen in the United States. Although because these are state by state cases, it could take a bit longer. So there's some of that. Inga speaking out was good because, again, she's a lifelong Democrat, self-identified, as she says, and a champion of women's rights. She's a feminist. Here's another one of these weird breaks. It's like, if you listen to J.K. Rowling, she goes, I'm a lifelong feminist. I'm a liberal. I was supporting the Labour Party in England. I mean, I'm way over here, and now I'm a TERF. And so something's gone wrong here, right? So if enough of them speak out. And so I like the idea. I like Inga's idea of just take a knee. We're not going to compete. Now, that would not only get the attention of the race director, but the sponsors. Like, hey, hang on. Now, this has gone too far. If you're not even going to have a race, if no one will compete, then how's my product going to get promoted? That would put an end to it pretty quick, I think. without the individual athletes getting punished, right? And this is what's called belling the cat. This is one of these funny thought experiments. So the mice all decide, we got to put a bell on the cat so we hear him coming so we can escape. All right, who's going to put the bell on the cat? Well, you go. Well, I'm not going to go because then I'll get eaten. So no one wants to be the first, right? Because they're the ones that'll get punished. So you got to have a collective, okay, here's what we're all going to do. We're all going to protest. Right. And that's it. And then no one gets individually targeted.
Right. And it just to me, again, just looking at the numbers, looking at the polling, it flies in the face of what the polls and the numbers would suggest that which side the people are on. How and these situations, there's always more to it. Who knows if they were going their separate ways. Anyways, I mean, you could think about it 100 different ways, but. This is not an issue where you're trying to say that, I think everybody should take, a gallon of EPO every day. I mean, that's obviously that's a very unpopular opinion. This is one where you think you're on the right side of it. Yeah. And yet you get fired. Yeah.
Yes. Well, right. But there's the case of Inga, her team, the sponsor, the guy with the money, if you Jeff somebody, I think is not he's not woke. He's like, I support women's sports. Right. It's the whole reason I have this women's team. But there was something in the complications of how it unraveled, and everybody was afraid to say anything. So it's hard to say how that one will play out. Hopefully, that team will support the women and whatever that takes.
Yeah. Of course, you had the and when you read the IOC's framework on this whole topic, which is typical, I always look at anything that the IOC or the USOC or these governing bodies ever opine on. I'm very skeptical of that stuff, but you read it and it's very political and written by a bunch of lawyers and probably cost a ton, but it really doesn't say very much. At the end of the day, it says, right. We have to include everybody. And while it may not be fair, we need some more research. And if you guys know who can pay for it, let us know. But at the very end, they say it's up to the federation or it's up to the sport, right? Mm-hmm. So the sporting federation, which then, of course, so in this case, you'd have the IOC, then you'd go to the UCI in the case of cycling. And then it would go down to the national federations to decide. Here in cycling, the British Federation who mm-hmm. came out and just did an outright ban. But that's really the only one.
Yeah. I would even change, and I hope that trend follows, but maybe instead of saying that we're going to ban trans athletes, how about we're going to support women's divisions? We're going to support women's sports. We're going to support women's rights. Mm-hmm. And
that's a rebrand.
I think it's a good rebrand, mm-hmm. right? It's not negative. We like trans. We support trans. We're going to have this open division. Maybe if you have a huge building and you have 25 bathrooms in there, you make 5 of them gender neutral. Mm-hmm. And they're just saying, we see that all the time. You have the 2 little logos, yep. Men and women logo. Okay. All right. So find ways to do that. Although I understand building entire new locker rooms in a gym would be prohibitively expensive.
And you would have very small fields.
Yes, well, but isn't that the case sometimes with like age divisions, like maybe in the Man Triathlon, the 80 plus division?
80 plus. There's not a whole lot of 80-year-olds out there.
Yeah, it's just the way it goes. I mean, you can't have everything. It's just
the way it goes. But that doesn't fly.
I know. Well,
with that community.
I know. But you can't. I know. But you can't have everything. It's too bad. I mean, Inga even said this on my show. She's taking. I think she says she has to take testosterone. She had breast cancer and recovery and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. She goes, now my testosterone, I think that was what it was. It was too high. Now I can't compete against the women, but I'd rather be alive. And that's just, I can't have everything. Right.
And what does she do? Did I read is she like a rancher?
She's a rancher. Yeah.
She was always kind of I never really, she was older, and so of course I was just this dumbass 17-year-old kid from Plano. So she probably had zero interest in talking to me. But I always thought she was like, something like lived on a ranch.
Yeah, she has a ranch or a private ranch. Cattle.
So she doesn't care.
She cares
in principle, but this is not. I mean, she has
She has
a life and a job.
That's
and
correct.
This was sort of
the women's team thing she was doing, as I understand it, was just because she supports women's rights and women's sports, because that's what she did for all those decades. She's really sharp. I mean, she really knows the history going all the way back to the 1950s, and the kind of the background to what led to all this in the first place.
Right.
The civil rights, women's rights, all that stuff. But this whole idea of it's kind of I mentioned the kind of the ghost in the machine, the dualism. There's this kind of blank slate model of human nature that caught on post World War II. Because look what all the kind of eugenics and biological determinism led to, the Holocaust. This is terrible. We don't want that. Instead, we're going to treat human nature as this blank slate. We can make people anything we want. It's entirely culture. And that's just not the case. Biology makes a huge difference. And but that's where it started. So this case, this Dr. Money, these parents had their son
This is
circumcised.
just as a bit of background for the listener, because I didn't know these stories of there were two doctors. There was Dr. Money and Dr. There was another, and I learned of them because I did. I watched Matt Walsh's film "What Is a Woman," and he highlights the examples of these two doctors, Money and I'm forgetting
the other guy's name too now. Yeah.
And the way that it was portrayed, and look, I enjoyed watching the film. I thought, you learned some things. As we said earlier, it was almost like Borat. You're kind of punking these people, but nonetheless, he couldn't get an answer. Right, you can't deny that. So no matter how much we're punking people, we couldn't get an answer, which I think you have to acknowledge. But the examples of the two doctors were very troubling. Mm-hmm. Money and the name we're forgetting. But I'm sorry, Dan.
Well, in the case of Money, his parents had their son circumcised. Well, they had twins, and the one circumcision was botched, and so they had to take most of the penis off. And then this Dr. Money said, "Let's just take it off completely and treat him as a girl, raise him as a girl." Mm-hmm. This is the blank slateism that raising somebody is entirely determinate of what they become. It's not true. It's not even remotely close to being true, but that's what the prevailing wisdom was in the 50s and 60s in pediatrics and general culture at large, just the blank slate. Environment is everything. Genetics is nothing. And that lasted all the way really until the 1990s, when it became apparent that human behavior is largely influenced by genetics, biology, and so on. And they're just these big differences. And it started off as sociobiology in the 1970s. Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson, was the promoter of that. And he was a lifelong liberal Democrat. Again, he was railroaded as this right-wing Nazi, just this fascist for saying this. And then by the 90s, the evolutionary psychology is what it became. The study of human behavior from both a environmental, cultural, and a biological evolutionary perspective. There's just differences between men and women, say, in dating behavior and sexual reproduction and interests and sex and partners and this kind of thing. It's just huge. And no one wanted to talk about that until really the late 90s. That's not that long ago.
No.
And so really, we're talking Charles Darwin published his Scent of Man in 1871. Applied evolutionary theory to human behavior. It was a century before it was okay to talk about that again. You would be canceled for talking about genetic origins of anything. Right. That's a big cultural shift.
By the way, and on the situation we just talked about with Dr. Money. So the little boy who was, the doctor said, well, let's just raise this child as a little girl. So basically, spent most of their young life as a girl. And struggled, right? Yeah. So you could look at this both ways. You could say, well, okay, well, that's what it feels like. Right. It has a terrible ending. I think her brother died of an overdose, and I think
he committed suicide.
They both. Long story short, terrible ending. They both died. That was hard to watch. All right, last question, and I'll let you go. Or we'll go have lunch, even more importantly.
Okay.
Because you're smart and you can, I like to think you can see around corners. What happens? What happens here? Let's fast forward, and I'm not talking a year. right?
Yeah.
Let's go 10 years.
Yeah,
what
10 years.
happens
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. My wife keeps asking me this. When's that pendulum swinging back, Shermer?
Not so much on cancel. I do think the pendulum on that stuff, and God, I hate even saying the word woke, but I mean, it is what it is. I do think, call it whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
I do think that is swinging back, and maybe I'm an optimist, but on this issue specifically, trans and sport, and let's focus on the elite level. I mean, because there's also a way to break this down and say, listen, Johnny became Susie, and she's in the 5th grade and wants to play basketball. Honestly, I don't care. Right. That does have some complications, because it always, as a parent and other parents, you get to this locker room, changing room, bathroom issue, but let's leave that out. But at the elite level, right, we're talking about Olympic medals and Wimbledon finals and world championships. Yeah. What happens?
That could change fairly quickly. I think the long-term trends are on a decadal level, about 10 years, these things go on. That could happen as quickly as somebody votes in the IOC to say, or the UCI or any of these, this is what we're going to do. And then the other orgs go, oh, well, they did it, so let's do that. Right. So the British cycling organization banning trans athletes, again, just say protect women's rights, whatever. That could lead to other sporting bodies doing the same thing. That could happen in a year or two. I think the long-term trends, like if we look at comparisons, there was in the 1980s this thing called the Satanic Panic. There was this belief that there was a satanic cult in every city in America.
You have all these examples. It's amazing.
The most expensive trial in California history before OJ was the McMartin preschool case, right? Not far from here in Manhattan Beach. This trial lasted like 8 years. It was like tens of millions of dollars. And it was all based on the belief that there was this pedophile ring at this preschool in Manhattan. And the stories just kept getting wilder and wilder about all the crazy stuff that was going on, taking these kids out to Catalina Island for these satanic ritual killings. And it's like, what? These secret tunnels underneath the school no one could find. And then all of a sudden it's kind of swept across the country. Oh my God. Anytime anybody would find like a mutilated cat, the dog did it or whatever. Oh, that was a satanic killing, and then finally the FBI said, all right, this is getting out of hand. We're going to have to look into this satanic thing. I mean, wow, this could be really dangerous. And then they couldn't find any. It's like, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. There was a bunch of press stories about like, there is no such thing as a satanic cult in America. Okay, maybe there's one, right? And then in the 90s, there was another thing called the recovered memory movement. So these largely started by adult women going to therapy for depression or anxiety, weight loss, sleep problems, whatever. And there was a handful of these therapists that said, these are symptoms that you were molested as a child, sexually molested as a child. And these women would go, well, no, I wasn't. Well, you have suppressed it. It's a repressed memory. It's in there, and we can pull it out through, talking and dream interpretation and hypnosis and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they were swept across the country. There's like thousands of women said, no, these are adult women with no corroborating evidence that they were ever molested. No siblings or other parents said, yeah, that actually happened. These were every one of them had no evidence that this actually happened. And it ended up in some trials against men, fathers, grandfathers, uncles, whatever. And some of them went to jail. They were convicted of sexual molestation based on nothing more than a recovered memory. Then all of a sudden, there was a movement of this thing called the false memory syndrome. And that these were women that said, you know what, this never happened. I was brainwashed by this therapist. And they started suing the therapist, and that put an end to it. Once the lawyers got involved, then everybody stopped, and the American Psychological Association and the other organizations said, you know what, there's no such thing as recovered memory. This is all bullshit.
Walk it back.
And it stopped it immediately, right? That could happen here. A few lawsuits, some of these detransitioners saying, well, there's already been these cases. There was that 13-year-old woman that had a girl, 15. She had her breast cut off when she was 15. I think she's 20 now or something. And she's suing the hospital that did this. I can't make a decision like that when I'm 15. Who let me do this? Where were the adults in the room?
Where were her parents?
Oh, the parents. Yeah, I know. Right.
Okay. So 10 years from now.
Yeah, probably 10 years.
You foresee an outright ban?
I think it's already happening state by state. But
no, I'm talking about the Olympic level, right? And again, the IOC kicks it to the federations. The national federations are clearly, the IOC kicks it to the international governing body. They sort of kick it to the national federations. You saw it, but nobody's followed suit with the Brits
yet. Hopefully, maybe by 2025, here we are, 2023, maybe by 2030, this will be history. And we'll be talking, there'll be books about this crazy time in American history. Like everybody thought this crazy thing, just like we do with the Satanic Panic. It's like, what? It's like a witch hunt. We look at the witch hunts, go, Salem, what were these people thinking? Well, then you deconstruct it historically. Oh, there was this social contagion, this wave. And it was the same thing with the girl. These were teenage girls in Salem. One of them, whatever she was experiencing, started, hearing voices and writhing on the floor and possessed by witches, by demons. And then her friends started doing that. Oh, me too. Right. And then all of a sudden the entire town is contaminated with this idea that there's, devils in Salem. And then they killed 19 people, burned them as witches or pressed them.
That's a much worse outcome than what we're talking about.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't come to that.
A trans woman winning the Tour of Gila is not the same. I'll take that any day over.
But as a model for how a witch hunt is a good model.
We live in a different time, right? The media is all fucked up. Politics is extreme. Well, I guess that's one thing we didn't acknowledge. I mean, I think politics, certainly plays a hand here. Who knows what's going to happen in this next presidential election? I shudder to think, but we live in a different time. Yeah. Social media, the polarized country. It's different, right? This.
I think the bottom line should be we should be free to talk about what we want.
This is the whole point of having this conversation, because I mean the Times, and there was one other episode that did come up that I won't get into because I don't know, but it was I got sort of attacked on this issue. I touched on it earlier, but the other thing that did happen outside, I don't really give a shit. As I told you, like you can come at me. I mean, I feel like I'm being kind of, basic, pretty fair on this thing. But the most important thing that happened, because there were other people in the room, is everybody ran out of the room.
Wow.
And I was just like, wait a minute, hang on, where'd everybody go? And then of course later on they're like, hey, like, by the way, I agree with you. Or that sounded like a good solution, but I don't want to be around it.
Right.
And that's
right.
That's to your point. Like we're just afraid to have this conversation, which was really, as I've told people, this is to me a series of conversations almost about cancel culture that sort of, for this purpose, cloaked in this issue of trans in sport. Now, most of it obviously is about trans in sport, but it really is about what's wrong with people, like, and not just this issue, many, many others.
Yeah, time for liberals to speak up. If you support women's rights, then speak up. It's not anti-trans, not transphobe. You're pro-women.
Well, nor are you a bigot.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Or a TERF.
Or a TERF. Or you and I can't be a TERF. But
no, you cannot.
I guess we could be. I guess it's just feminist. Not
okay. Since you're such and we'll probably cut this part out, but let's have this. Will be the last thing, and then we'll go have lunch. So since you're one of these guys that sits around and thinks clearly, right? So let's play a hypothetical game, right? So Lance Armstrong, that's me, is banned from cycling for life. Lance Armstrong's banned from cycling for life. Cannot compete.
I read that.
But I love to compete, right?
I know you do.
I still train.
Yeah.
I'm competitive.
Yeah.
What happens, and again, this is just hypothetical, what happens if somebody pulls this memory out of me or whatever, and I decide that I want to be Leah Armstrong?
Right. You're a different person. Okay.
What happens? Right. That's you don't have to answer, but that's.
Oh no, I do want to answer.
Okay, good.
I do want to answer and leave this in. No, well, first of all, I think somebody would draw the line. Hey, come on, this is
no, you can't.
By the rules, yes, you could. I guess you'd have to be considered a completely different person, which by the trans activist definition, you are whoever you say you are. So if you're no longer Lance Armstrong, now you're Leah Armstrong, then you're in. And I think we'd all say, come on.
Michael, I would not that I am just, but I would just be playing by those rules. It's not obviously
the rules are wrong. Yeah,
obviously, I'm very happy. Despite it all, I'm very happy being Lance. But
well, you should be. But if I may say, but while I have you here, the whole thing that happened to you, I think it's really unfortunate. And I wish when you talked to Oprah, you could have just said, let me explain what's going on in this sport. Everybody is doing it. We now know from all the books and articles and research and so on, pretty much everybody in your generation was doping. Right. So how is it that you are punished and not the other, Jan and the other guys?
Well, Jan was punished.
Well, yes. Okay. But not like you. I mean,
look, if we want to, this is a different thing, but what I will say is
he's not banned for life, right?
No, but Jan was punished, right? And so every one of my
podium finishers,
my peers or my rivals were, we can go down the line, right? So, and they were from different countries, right? Jan from Germany, Pantani from Italy, Jimenez from Spain. You go down the line. Well, and I'm from America. Every one of those guys, I have a George, right? Mm-hmm. Jan had a Zabel. Mm. Pantani had a Basso. Jimenez had a, all the, so the sort of the Robin to the Batman got off. Mm-hmm. But the Batman didn't get off, right? And the facts are the facts, and is unfortunate and is awful and sad as it has been to watch, right? We know. And then Vandenbroek, right? So from Belgium, Frank Vandenbroek, no longer with us. Pantani no longer with us. Jimenez no longer with us. And Jan almost, we almost lost. But meanwhile, and I've talked a little bit, I think I talked about it in the 30 for 30, but Tour de France started in Germany a few years ago. Jan Ullrich banned from coming to the race.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
But who was on the podium welcoming, the president of whatever and all the sponsors? Eric Zabel. Uh-huh. So they did suffer. They didn't. Whether or not. By the way, who cares? But you could be run some agency and say, well, I've stripped you. That's Wikipedia. That's not people's memories, and that's certainly not my memory. It's not Jan's memory. It's not anybody else's memory.
But my point is just the fairness of it. I mean, if everybody's doing what you're doing, why is it's not really cheating? What is it? It's just these are the norms.
I did say something along those lines on Oprah. By the way, Oprah was a long time ago. Yeah. It was 10 years ago. Yeah. I mean, fucking time flies, but it was 10 years ago. I'd probably be a totally different interview now, and it doesn't matter. I mean, it's
but it does, because the lack of consistency. Like the NFL or Major League Baseball. How come Barry Bonds is not banned from baseball? And he still has. Well, there's an asterisk next to his all-time home run record. This stuff goes on in so many sports, and if the governing bodies, are not consistent about this, it just doesn't strike outsiders to the sport as fair.
Right.
I mean, how many of your competitors have said, I want one of those yellow jerseys that I would have been from number 2?
Well, the answer to that is zero.
Yeah. And because they know. Right. They're the ones who would say that wasn't fair. Right. They would be the Riley Gaines saying, that guy took my spot and that is wrong. Right. And nobody is saying that. Why? Because we know why. Because they were doing the same thing.
Well, we're not. Cycling has not had... as I've gone through this series, right, and you really kind of, you have to have conversations have to be at some point based on fact and truth, and cycling just hasn't. I think they felt like they had this reckoning and they had this moment of truth, but it went too far. It swung too far, and it still exists, right? I watched the Netflix series, some parts of it, and you get Jonathan Vaughters on there talking about his moral compass and all these. It's fine, right, but we're not having, but nobody has sat down and said, okay, well, you got a moral compass and you say Lance doesn't. Who was the best guy for 7? Nobody's followed up and said, or so are you telling me? Because to your point, nobody has come and said, hey, by the way, I want the jersey. I want the trophy. I want all the whatever that comes with it. Nobody's done that. But at the same time, nobody, that makes these documentaries or does these interviews has ever said, well, hang on. Do you not think the best guy won? Forget all the messy stuff and the complication and all this shit. did the best guy win?
Right.
Nobody's ever asked that question.
That's really the only question that matters.
But in an indirect way, right? The question has been asked, right? Because nobody came, and especially, I mean, I sleep at night, as Jonathan Vaughters pointed out. I always have a little fun after I watched it. I was like, I look at my Oura ring. I fucking slept 10 hours. Heart rate was like 40. I'm like, well, I guess my moral compass is still fucked up because I slept like a baby last night. Anyways.
But you would feel bad if other guys came forward and said, I wasn't doping and I should have had that.
Of course you
jersey.
would.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's
and again, the inconsistency, the Houston Astros used that sign stealing system, and they won the World Series instead of the Dodgers. Right. And Major League Baseball said, that was really, really bad. Okay, did the Dodgers get the World Series trophy? No. Okay, so come on, where's the consistency?
Right, but in most sports, when they snap the ball, I had this conversation. We're having this conversation with somebody, but that's why they hurry up and snap the ball.
Oh, right.
Because once you snap the ball, play's over.
Or the previous
plays.
Tom Brady, what happened? Well, he got reprimanded for a couple games. Yeah.
Anyways.
All right.
We're going down the rabbit hole. Thanks for doing this.
All right.
Interesting stuff.
Thanks for having me.
It is complicated.
It is complicated.